Welcome to the Embracing Brokenness podcast, where our goal is to engage with all of those willing to venture deeper into their transformational journey with Christ. Here's your host and co-founder of Embracing Brokenness Ministries, Steve Adams.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. And to our new listeners, there's quite a few of you actually, and we're glad to have you on board. Appreciate you taking the time to join us and be part of this family, I would call it. We're going to do something really fun today. So I went back into my archives and found a podcast that I did with my colleague at the time. This was in January of 2016 when I was doing business coaching for entrepreneurs, mostly those that were focused on sort of the kingdom side of their business, wanting to honor God, do things in their business to make a difference, not just temporally, not just for this kingdom, but for God's kingdom, for eternity. And so part of my coaching strategy was to help them do that with the ability to not only be profitable, but to allocate their resources in a way that could make a difference for people's life long term. So when I found this particular podcast that my buddy Joe Diorsi and I did together, it was the first one we did for the coaching business. It was on the topic of humility and dying to self. And I thought, man, this is just so relevant even today, and for leaders and business owners, and just for anyone in particular. Okay, so every one of us has something to lead. We have a kingdom that God has assigned to us, whether it be in our family, whether it be in our career, whether it be in our relationships with others. We're all leaders. We just have to face it and understand it. And it requires humility in every aspect of what we do in leadership. So I thought I would play for you this podcast and have you respond if you want to. Just get back to me. Let me know if it was helpful to you by sending an email, going to our website, just filling out the form. Give us some feedback. You can do it even at the podcast locations and on social media. But I really thought this could be helpful to you as you even consider what's God have next for you. You know, dying to self and being humble in our approach to life is important in every aspect of it, not just in leadership, but in our relationships with our fellow humans and with what God's called us to do in the kingdom. So here you go. Hopefully it is helpful to you, and we'll come back and see you again next time.
You are listening to the Live with Purpose Coaching LLC podcast. This is your host, Joe Diorsi, and I am with Senior Business and Life Coach Steve Adams.
Hi, folks. How are you all this day?
And you are tuning into our first official edition of the Live with Purpose podcast. And our topic today is the concept of dying to self. And I have a couple questions for you, Steve.
Okay, fire away.
This is the concept of dying to self. We'll get into what exactly that means. But this is something that's been close to our hearts the past year. And something that we've been privy to. And my question here, Steve, to start off is the idea or the practice of humility. Can you help our listeners to translate the biblical concept of quote unquote dying to self and transpose it into something that the business world would understand?
Wow, what an opening question. That's one we could probably talk about for about 30 minutes. So to limit that, let me just start by saying this. That is such the Jesus model, right? I mean, if you look back, and of course you just wrote some posts up on our website on in our blog on humility. Mm-hmm. I'd encourage anybody to get to that 3-part series I think Joe did not long ago. So really, really good stuff. So where do I go for that answer? I got to go to the Word. So I looked at Luke 22:42, and this is something that was inside of one of your blogs. Facing a brutal death, preceded by a vicious beating, and in preparation to shoulder the sin of the world, Jesus prays to the Father on the Mount of Olives. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. And yet, that conversation's probably been had around that verse on God's will, but I see it even deeper than that. Humility clearly shown by the Son of God, who was God, choosing to actually humble himself before his maker, his Father, in many ways. That's pretty monumental. I mean, if you think about it. And look, as business owners, let's remember that we're just simply stewards over everything God owns. His total resources are on this planet. And our humility is his will. And just like Jesus stepped up and just submitted entirely to his Father, we need to do the same thing. And humility is at the center of that.
And I'm sure we have plenty of examples or mentors in our own life, Steve, that embody this, but nothing beats the red letters. And like you say, citing from Luke chapter 22 here, it was ingrained in everything that our Savior did.
Yeah, it was.
So Steve, you've led in business for quite some time now, a couple decades with varied experience. So you're a good person to ask this. Mm-hmm. When Bill Pollard, who was the ex-CEO of ServiceMaster, maybe our listeners have heard of that organization, when he says that humility is hard to sustain as a leader, what does he mean?
Well, this world constantly bombards us with images of what success looks like. So if you think about it, especially as leaders, when we get a few wins under our belt, I'll call it that, we believe we actually are the reason for those wins. Now, in some instances, granted, we have decisions we make each day, and they have a tremendous impact, not only in the business, but outside of the business. And that's what we're trying to do as leaders, make decisions. But to some extent, we have to temper that, though. We do nothing alone. So, there's God, number one. There's our team, right? But then really I think of days gone by for me when I look at just a personal example of this. Early on in my career, I had a business in Philadelphia that was very successful. This was, I'll give away my age a little bit, but mid to late 80s. And in a time when real estate was on a run up, and we were in the consulting business back then as well. And it went really, really well. And I partnered with some guys that didn't believe exactly what I did. So we, it's easy to travel the road when things are going well. And you think everything is marked by success by the amount of dollars in your bank account. But when things get tough, like, where do you really turn to see the true source? And for me, I watched this deterioration over time, and watching myself make really bad choices, thinking I had sort of the corner on what it took to be successful. And, God just systematically stripped that away from me. It was really hard, and market conditions changed back in the late 80s. So I saw just a stripping away of the things that I thought were really important. And, humility comes pretty quickly when you realize that, hey, maybe I didn't have as much to do with this as I thought I did. So I think as a leader, and what Bill Pollard said, it's hard to sustain, and primarily because we just aren't wired that way. At some time or another in the process, we're going to believe that we actually had a lot to do with this.
So Steve, many experienced leaders, Christian and secular alike, really point to humility as an essential. So why is it labeled as an essential, and why is it so rare in the business world?
Well, I just go back to the last question. We start to believe our own press. I think that's the as leaders that do experience it. First of all, entrepreneurs are usually risk takers by nature. We love the reward that comes along with that. With risk is reward. So we often, see our efforts pay off just because we're willing to do that. And then, I was talking about the business that I had. Well, hey, I went out and decided, well, this will never end, right? So I'm just going to go out and buy the big cars, houses, boats, stuff like that. True to the old adage, he who dies with the most toys wins. Well, that's not so humble, is it, really, when you think about it? So, I had a 85 Lincoln Town Car, a boat in the Chesapeake, an oceanfront property in North Carolina, and a condo in Antigua. That's just to touch on a few. What the heck? I totally felt like I arrived, and that's in my, 20s, early 30s. It's crazy. That's not exactly humility. And I think what I think of, and when it all went crashing down around me, was this. The verse in Proverbs 16:18 starts to kick in. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. So pride at the root of everything is really part of why we walk this path and why humility is so critical and essential, but rare.
Mm-hmm. So let's get practical with this
All right.
thing, Steve. What are some examples in the workplace of applying this humble rule of thumb?
Yeah, and it really starts with surrounding yourself with what I would call truth tellers, accountability partners, people in business. It's part of why we do what we do, Joe. I mean, we coach people, we help people in career transitions, we deal with the 3 Ps, as I call it: people, process, product inside organizations. But really, you as leaders need accountability not only inside the organization but outside the organization and your business. I mean, there's really no room for yes men or women around good leaders. If and probably a lot of you guys have been around situations where people hire people that'll just tell them what they want to hear. And honestly, that leads to destruction eventually. You just don't get honest feedback. So we need people constantly to challenge us and keep us humble. Nobody has all the answers. Those days that I discussed earlier, I wish I would have been smart enough to put people around me that would have challenged me to stop looking at the temporal, look to the eternal, and I didn't have it. So I think it was John Maxwell said this, or someone. I know teamwork makes the dream work. It really is true. And so for all of us, building on an organization that is humble, should be humble, starts with admitting when you're wrong, and then allowing others to help you sort what that means. And really, honestly, it'll endear you to your team. Admitting weaknesses and areas that we've talked about before, and blind spots, places that we don't see our problems that do exist behind the scenes. We need other people's help. So another kind of tangible option, Joe, would be to do this, and this is not done nearly enough, is to give out of our surplus, not only financially, by the way, but through acts of service to your team and to the community. So humility and our ability to serve others will go hand in hand. I mean, just think about it. We have a place here in Lancaster County that serves the homeless called Water Street Mission, and I have had a chance to visit there a few times and do some volunteer work, and it's humbling. When you get in a situation where people don't even have a place to live or eat, and these are the people that most folks on the street, when they pass them, look the other way. They're afraid to even make eye contact. You want to be humbled, see what that looks like up close and personal. And then beyond that, volunteer your time anywhere that matters to you. Those are some practical things I begin to see. As you give, you get much more in return and understand what true humility really looks like. And I think serving others, along with not only financially supporting them, is a great way to make that happen.
And I think relationally, Steve, just people being naturally relational, giving our time many times will supersede our dollars.
And it will.
Especially with a team around you that supports you.
That's right.
So, Steve, you're a guy with a lot of years under your belt. Only a few.
Thanks, buddy. I really appreciate that.
and many lessons learned. So, here's a question for the more youthful entrepreneurs, maybe the generation Xers and Yers and whatever that new one is that just graduated with the Z's.
Yeah.
So what's your advice for these young leaders that are interested, or at least open, to being humble in today's marketplace and cultivating a company culture of honor?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, a winning culture, which we've talked about a little around here recently, in any organization starts with understanding the why behind what it is we do. If it's simply for money, forget it. I mean, you're just, I used an experience of mine in the past to tell you that I know in that time in my life, and I was younger then, that it was all really about accumulating assets, kind of buffering and padding my balance sheet. And I figured that was the world's definition of success. That's what it looks like. And for anyone younger to really understand what it's going to take, it has to be something more. I right now I have a jar goods store. It's basically, we sell pickles and jams, jellies, fruit, salsas, that kind of thing. And that's a self-managing company for me, so I'm not there day to day. I do what I do here because I love what I'm doing here, and I love leading that team. But on a day-to-day basis, it's not necessary. So when I look at it, it's in a tourist community, and people come to our store for nourishment and to experience something uniquely made here in Lancaster County. But my team doesn't just feed them physically. So what I've challenged them to do is we want to feed their souls too. So what does that really look like when somebody comes in, traveling, and they want to have a different type of experience that they wouldn't expect in a place like that? We want to step up our service levels. We want to, we actually have demonstrations of how canning takes place in the old-fashioned way and the history of it. And so their experience is more than just walking in, buying a jar of pickles. So I think for anybody out there right now, think a little bit about why it is you do what you do. Whether you're, in the plumbing business, or you're in some kind of service-oriented advertising, marketing, if you provide, if we have clients that are in the auto dealership business, just you name it, there's about anything. But if you're a young leader and you have an opportunity to serve people and to really look beyond what it is that you actually do, what you deliver, figure out what the big why is. And this was also something that, I heard recently, and I think this was written, and those things in a TED Talk by Simon Sinek or somebody, but this idea of what's in your top box, really, really important. Top box meaning like what's the most important thing to you. And I did a blog post about this recently as well that you can find on our website. But why we do what we do, that's so deeply important. And as believers, if you are, then you should be asking those questions. That's much more important than the actual doing. So look, guys, when I think, humility comes with understanding of your mission and what you care about most. And that needs to be other people. So humility comes along with concern for others. And the more you do that, the more humbling it is. And that's our team, our clients, our customers, our vendors, everyone we come in contact with. And you should all feel that same way and operate in your business the same way.
Well, thanks, Steve, for helping our listeners understand what a prized possession humility is in our personal lives and professional lives.
This was another episode of the Embracing Brokenness podcast. For more information on Embracing Brokenness Ministries, or to subscribe to our blog, podcast, YouTube channel, or engage with us on social media, please visit our website at embracingbrokenness.org. Thanks for joining us.